Welcome to another Third Apron Salary Cast. I'm Yossi Goslin, NBA salary cap analyst, and this is a mock-off season where I do some hypothetical moves, mainly for fun, but also to show how some teams can accomplish some of their goals within the salary cap rules. And this one's going to be on the Boston Celtics. I've already covered them extensively. I've had a discussion on my podcast about them with Justin Quinn, and also wrote about their salary cap situation on the Third Apron newsletter. I highly suggest you check them out. I put the links in the description. So first, let's take a look at the Celtics payroll heading into the upcoming season. So you've got Jason Tatum. He's set to begin his 5-year Supermax. Jaylen Brown's already on his. And they've got Drew, Porzingis, and Derek White all making an average combined $30 million annually. And you got Sam Hauser making $10 million. So when you include their two picks, they've got a first-round pick, 28th overall. They've got the 32nd pick in the draft. Usually those require a little bit more than the rookie minimum. That puts them roughly $44 million above the luxury tax, and that gives them a penalty projecting at almost $280 million. So this is how they're getting a $500 million plus roster to run it back next year. And the biggest thing you might notice is their penalty is bigger than their payroll. That's never happened in the NBA. The closest we got to that were the 2022 Warriors, which won the championship. Their tax penalty was like only $5 million less than their payroll. And I don't anticipate the Celtics are gonna want to get anything close to that, given all their circumstances now. So you might be asking, why is their penalty so high? If you pay attention to tax penalties and where teams have paid, you might notice the Suns had a pretty similar proximity above the tax line last year. It was like $43 million, but they only spend $150 million tax penalty. So why is it the Celtics have to pay way more than the Suns? One, the tax system is going to be changed starting this upcoming season, where the deeper you go in the tax, the higher the penalties, the higher the rates are going to be. But then the other thing is that the Celtics are now going to be designated repeat taxpayers. So they're going to pay even higher rates on top of that. They got designated this because they've been in the luxury tax in 3 of the last 4 seasons. That's how you get into it. And they just did it for 3 years in a row. So we already know that they were unlikely to run this back completely, even if they did advance a little further. But now that Jason Tatum is hurt, probably going to miss all of next season, that might change just how aggressive they might be in terms of trying to save money. So what this video is going to be about is trades to help them reduce their penalty and ideally get below the second apron, but also show if they really want to be aggressive, how they can maybe even get below the tax. And ideally doing all this without giving up any substantial assets. And I'll get into that, what their draft pick situation is, all that stuff. So yeah, I guess the big question is, what is the line for the Celtics? Here is where they are in relation to the aprons. They are $37 million above the first apron, but $25 million above the second apron. They finished above the second apron last year, and now their 2032 draft pick is frozen. That's really the long-term penalty of being over the second apron. If they do it again this year, their 2033 pick will be frozen. I get the feeling they might want to avoid that, but the bigger reason you want to get below the second apron is that you're saving like $25 million or so. That is going to give the Celtics substantial savings. So let's just look at an example of what that might entail. Let's say they salary dump Kristaps Porzingis to the Nets. The only team was cap space. That might require them including an asset. But just hypothetically, let's just say they magically took his salary off the books. You remove that $30.7 million amount. That cuts their entire roster expense in half, a little bit more than that. If they're not going to be true contenders this year, it might be worth them getting below the tax entirely. One reason to get below the tax is that the longer you are below it, then you can get out of the repeater tax. So that can help them be in a better position in the future to be taxpayers again. Now, personally, I don't think they're going to be quite as aggressive to get below the tax entirely, but just for the fun of it, that's what I'm going to accomplish in this video. So really quickly, I just want to show you the Celtics draft situation between this draft and the 2032 draft. So they've got the 20th overall pick in this year's draft, and they just are down one. They traded a 2029 first to the Blazers as part of getting Drew Holiday. So because they have that pick outgoing, they also cannot trade their 2028 or 2029 due to Stepien rule complications. You can't trade picks in consecutive years. Also, as mentioned earlier, their 2032 is frozen. because they were over the second apron last year, so they can't trade that as well. So they can technically trade about a maximum of 3 picks, which is basically their first this year, one of their 2026 or 27 firsts, and then their 2031 first round pick. Right now, I don't think is really necessarily a good time for them to trade any of their first round picks. Ideally, like maybe they could do something by trading their 28th because they do have the 32nd pick in this draft. But just given all the uncertainty going on, if they can reduce their payroll and luxury tax penalties significantly without trading any of their future firsts, I think that would be ideal. If anything, they're going to want to add on to their draft picks, get more future picks, and that would put them in a much better position to retool their roster around Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown whenever Tatum is ready and 100% again. Now, it's also worth noting that because the Celtics are over the second apron and the first apron for that matter, they have a lot of restrictions towards making any types of trades. But to simplify it, they can't increase their payroll. They're going to have to decrease it, and no matter what they do, which is what I'm going to end up doing in this video anyways, because they're trying to save money and they can't send out cash in trades. Now, at the same time, there's no minimum restriction in terms of how much money they have to bring back. Technically, they can send out as much money and take back as little as possible. To do that, though, when you're doing a 2-team trade, it's a little harder to maximize your savings. So the easier way to get around that, especially in this new CBA environment, is to expand the trades, have multiple teams involved, and that is going to be the key to how I get the Celtics to save way more money without getting a cap space team involved. So first, I want to talk about Derek White because I think there's a very interesting case to trade him right now. He's 30 years old. His value's arguably at the peak it's going to be, might not have more trade value than he is right now. By the time Tatum comes back, White will be in his age, turning 32 years old. If they can get a haul of draft picks and some interesting players, I think there's like a legitimate strong case to consider trading him now, even though you're going to need a guy like him when the Celtics are ready to be true contenders again. So this is the type of trade I came up with that at a minimum, I think I'd consider in terms of what type of value it would take to move off from him right now. I went over this trade in my Mavs mock off-season video. You guys can check that out. Mainly about how I could see the Mavs trying to go for it. I have them getting back 2 unprotected first-round picks in the future, 2029 via the Lakers, 2031 via the Mavs. And I get them bringing back a couple solid role players, Daniel Gafford, Celtics killer Caleb Martin. The Mavs are currently over the second apron, so I had them include another team to take on Dwight Powell to get them below, so now it works for them, and include a second-round pick for their troubles. Now, I will say that as far as Derek White, the Celtics don't need to trade him to accomplish their financial goals. They can basically do a bunch of other trades involving Holiday, Porzingis, Hauser, and save all the money they need to accomplish all their financial goals while keeping White. But I just wanted to show this type of trade. I don't think they'll trade White in the end, but just as an example of what I think at a minimum it would take for them to consider moving him right now. Now, here's where the real savings start to begin. So I did a Clippers mock-off season where I had them acquiring Drew Holiday. They've been linked to him. They almost traded for him back in 2023 before the Celtics got him. And I just showed what the Clippers would have to give up from their perspective, which to make the salaries match, they would have to send out Bogdanovich, Drew Eubanks, and Chris Dunn. So let's say it was a 2-team trade, then the Celtics would only save about $8.5 million, which is still a lot. They would end up saving like $90 million against the tax. But here's the modified version where that involves the Wizards. They're taking Bogdanovich instead, as well as Eubanks, and they're also getting the Celtics 28th pick, and in exchange, the Celtics get back Sadiq Bey, Colby Jones, not like a ton of upside, but just some decent, and they're still getting Chris Dunn, who can replace Holiday. So by doing this, they save an additional $8 million on their payroll, and this would get them right down to the second apron. So now they've saved roughly $130 million in total just by doing this trade. Now, they're still about like $19 million above the tax, so we're going to continue to see if we could get them lower. So I was having a difficult time coming up with a Kristaps Porzingis trade. I think there should be teams interested in him, but it's a little challenging with his salary. There is an argument for the Celtics keeping him because what if they can extend him at a much lower amount? But maybe there is another team you can have more value to and end up doing that same type of extension later. So I also was thinking, what if the Celtics also start focusing on some higher upside guys in this trade? Maybe while they're in the process of saving money, they can also start to bring in some higher upside guys to start building out towards their next core of their next great team. So in this one, I've got them sending Kristaps Porzingis to the Pelicans. I've got the Pelicans sending CJ McCollum and that Pacers first next year, which should probably be a low pick, to the Hornets. And the Celtics, they get Mark Williams, who was traded to the Lakers, and then that trade got rescinded. I would imagine that the Hornets are going to look to trade him again this summer, but I wouldn't expect them to get quite as much as they did in that Lakers deal. And the Celtics bring back Grant Williams. This one then gets their penalty down by another $30 million. They're now roughly $10 million above the tax. So we got one more move left to get under it entirely. So the last thing I did was trade Sam Hauser to a team with an exception big enough to take his $10 million salary. I would guess they can get back a couple seconds for him. Maybe they can get a first. I wouldn't anticipate that. But if they can get some seconds and the savings to get under the tax, I think that might be still pretty worth it. I could see teams like the Pelicans, Kings, Clippers being interested, just to name a few. So this gets the Celtics well below the tax. They save a total of $320 million in the process. They're below the aprons. And that's it. They cleared all their financial goals with all these moves that I've done. Now, again, like I mentioned, I don't know if they're going to be quite this aggressive to save money. I'm sure if you're a Celtics fan, you might be hating this roster. It's not perfect, but if they are going to be this aggressive, then yeah, it's probably going to cost them being super competitive next year. And like I mentioned earlier, all the savings came mainly from trading Drew, Porzingis, and Sam Hauser. So they could still basically have this roster, but while keeping Derek White instead of Caleb Martin and Daniel Gafford. Now, they also still have enough space where they can make another move. They have two notable free agents, Luke Cornett and Al Horford. They have about $6.5 million below the tax after all the moves I did. Maybe you can bring back one of Cornett or Horford within that amount. That's a little more than the tax pyramid level, just in case they want to bring a little more center depth. So I know this roster is several steps below the standard that they just had, but in reality, if they're going to be making some moves that aggressively reduces their payroll and tax and all that, it's probably going to take several years for them to realistically reestablish a winning core, a championship level core around Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. But at least now they get their costs controlled. They restock on some assets, assuming they do a Derek White trade, get some decent upside. But most importantly, they have a ton of cap flexibility again, and they're in a much stronger position to retool this roster to being a championship contender again. So that's a mock-off season. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. I'm pretty interested in knowing if you think the Celtics should be quite this aggressive in saving money. And if so, if there are any other like high upside guys, maybe on rookie deals you think they should target. And make sure you're following me on Twitter, Blue Sky, my name, Yossi Goslin. I'm going to have a lot of salary cap analysis instantly as transactions happen. Make sure you subscribe to the Third Apron newsletter and the podcast on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple. And check the link in the description about Sports Business Classroom. There are still some spots for that. The program starts next month.